Here we go. Awesome. Welcome to, this is the week 5. I think so last week was the 5th week, and we will be rolling into the 6th week here coming up. I apologize for missing the last week. Kind of stuff happens. First of all, can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I'm just making sure the microphone's going in the right spot. Let's kick things off. I don't think April's going to be with us today. I think she's feeling a little bit under the weather. So we're gonna keep going. On that note, Graham, do you want to have everybody run through demos?
Just gotta hit the unmute button first. Yes, let's absolutely do it. All right, so which two wants to go first?
I can go if you like.
Ooh, I love the initiative, Tatiana. Let's do it. Maybe do you want to walk us through your issue first before you show us what we're doing, so we can kind of get that nice connection?
Yeah, let me share my screen and we can take a look. So here is our user story, and our ask was that we create a filter field so that a user can locate items on the shopping list. And the ask was that the list narrows based on, to display only the items based on the input into the field. There was also another ask that a user be able to clear the field with a delete button, and that the search field match any part of the item name, not just start searching from the beginning of the name. So let me demonstrate how this works. Here's our app, and I have previously inputted a user token in here so that we can go directly to a shopping list and get this going. So here's our newly created search field. As you can see, no delete button next to it right now, and I'm going to start typing. And as I'm typing, the list narrows to display just the items that I want to see. So I know, for example, there is pineapple on this list. So instead of pineapple, I'll just start typing apple, and we can see that the list narrows to show, any item that matches what's in the input field. Clicking the delete button can clear the search field and get us back to the full list. It's also not case sensitive, as you saw. I was typing all sorts of, just don't type in periods. I think I don't know that we did it for that. But the list narrows to display just the items that you need to see. And here is our code. So what we did, sorry. Okay, so here is this is a grocery container component, and here is our search field. And to be clear, we also used a label field here just to make sure that it's easier to read for like screen readers and things like that. And so on any change to this field, we store the value that is being inputted into the state. And then later on, what we're doing is we're filtering grocery, which is the output from the database. And we're comparing that output from the database to the input from the search field, and only showing the items that match the input from the user field. We ensure that both the database value and the input value are changed to lowercase so that people can match anything. That's the brief description of the search field and how it works. In addition to that, we implemented a couple of smaller changes, like there is a loading state now, something that we were talking about early in the process but never implemented. So just, in addition to the user story ask, we just added that as well. So now, while the items are being fetched from the database, the user doesn't see an empty list for a second. They just see this loading screen. And then once the items are loaded from the database, the user will see their list. Can I answer any questions?
I've got one for you. And first off, very nice. That looks really good. My question is kind of around ordering and sorting. So let's for a second pretend that you've got both pineapple and apple in your list. What behavior does your filter do? And do you like that behavior? Do you wish that there was a different sorting algorithm that you would put in place here?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So right now, there is no sorting. There's no sorting because I think that there's literally this week's story that asks us to sort the list alphabetically. So we didn't even attempt to implement that with our user story, but that's something that's coming up, and we'll probably, I mean, the user story asks us to do it alphabetically, so we'll have to do that.
Very nice. Very
Reading
nice.
ahead.
Don't want to do extra work. Anything else? I'll stop sharing. Sam, let me know. Oh, Sam, let me know if there's anything you want to add.
Oh, one actual thing that we implemented that we talked about was also showing the nav bar only if we were logged in, and then only showing the create list or input submit token input field if there was no token in local storage. If you like, you can show that off, but
Yeah,
other than that, that's basically all we did.
yeah, good point. So here's our nav bar at the bottom of the screen, and the user right now can navigate between the list and add an item view. And that's because I'm logged in. So let me log out real quick. To do that, I'm going to clear my local storage. Oops. And let me refresh. So now that I'm logged out, as you can see, there is no nav bar on the bottom of the screen. And if I log back in, sorry, let me just find. I'm just looking for a user token. Looks like I added a space. All right. So now that I am logged in, you can see that I have the nav bar at the bottom of the screen again. I know it doesn't look user-friendly right now, and that's something that we can change once we have a chance to implement CSS. So far, we haven't really been doing much styling in this app.
Very nice. I've got another question for you if no one else is going to dive in. So when you were first looking at this story, and this is to both of you, when you were first looking at this story, I'm sure you had an idea of how hard it was going to be. Did that pan out? Was it easier? Was it harder? How did your expectations fit with reality?
Personally, when I first read this user story versus the other user story, I thought this was definitely going to be an easier process. I've personally implemented this kind of feature into other projects, so it was something that I could kind of pull from the reference of information knowledge that I've already had and then implemented into here. So there was a general kind of process going into it, and knowing that it wasn't going to be too much of a hassle. I don't know, Tatiana, what did you think going into this one?
I agree. I had to do a search field once before. It was only once, but you know, once you do something on your own for the first time, you learn a lot, and you can kind of do that again. So I can't say that it was like terribly difficult. And also we wanted to make sure that we utilize the already existing grocery array, which, you know, is previously pulled from the database. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel here, and then we just used the includes method to compare the database values to the input.
Indeed, very nice. Any other questions from anybody else? All right, well then let's move on to the other pairing.
So we did not determine which one of us wanted to do the presentation. Yolanda, do you mind if I do it, or would you prefer to walk through it? All right, cool. And I will go ahead and share my screen. Let me get my user story up first. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I good there? Cool.
Indeed.
Perfect. Can everyone see my screen? Because last time I failed at this. All right, awesome. So the overall component of our user story is we wanted to be able to estimate the next purchase date that's computed at the time of purchase so that the app can start to learn kind of our purchase pattern and estimate the next purchase date a little bit more efficiently. So our one acceptance criteria was when the purchase is recorded, we wanted to estimate the number of days until the next purchase and have it calculated and recorded in the database. So we, in taking a stab at this, discovered some, we'll say some tricky things with the Firestore database in terms of date time structure. So here's what we came up with. So if I have my shopping list here, let's say I want to look at my Gala apples. I'm going to say, okay, let's buy those. So I'm going to check it off. With our logic that we created last week, we're going to leave that checked for 24 hours, at which point we will mark the item as purchased, assume we're not buying it again in that 24-hour period of time, and log everything in the database. So within the database side, if I go to my Gala apples, let's play some games here. So let's say currently it's estimated we need apples again on the 17th. So let's say instead of it being checked today, let's say that we checked it yesterday, let's say an hour earlier than it currently is, so that we're past that 24-hour period of time. So if I refresh, so August 17th is what we currently have, and the purchase interval currently is set at 6. So let's see what happens when we refresh. So now it says, all right, we expect you're going to want to purchase them on the 18th. Our purchase interval has now become 2 because we've only had 2 days in between. Actually, that seems wrong. I think I did the math wrong there. So we have 3 purchases. Estimated frequency is now 5 days in between purchases. So we have our last purchase date, and our next purchase date will now show on our list. I do actually need to double check the math on that after this because something seems potentially askew. But that is kind of the functionality of the app. So as you update, it slowly starts to learn. And it utilizes an estimates.js that was created for us. That's kind of an average of how many purchases, how many days between those purchases, and let's start to do the math on them. So within our code, we wanted to utilize the existing code we had in this grocery container and the grocery card that allowed us to check the item. So we know that we're already going to have that checked time documented somewhere. So we used that as part of our code. So we were able to, let me get to the correct section of code, all in this date structure here, as well as here. So in order to calculate the next purchase date, we know that the estimates.js needs 3 values. It's going to need an estimated like frequency that the initial user kind of said, hey, I think I need this soon, right? So within 7 days. It's going to need the number of times we've purchased the item. So we had to make sure we were storing that. And it also needed the actual kind of distance between the 2 purchases, the last 2 purchases. So if I bought it on the 13th and the 17th, we need to know that that 4 days is calculated and like stored somewhere. So using those fields here, we have our item.estimated frequency, which is what the user inputs the first time saying, I think it's going to be this number of days. We have our actual purchase interval, which is here, as well as the number of purchases, which is also stored in the database. They get past this calculate estimate, and that returns a value in days. That would be the next purchase date. And I think the trickiest thing we discovered here was when you pull information from Firestore, if you want to alter the dates, we were having a really, really difficult time altering just the UTC date string. And then pushing it to a JavaScript date object, we were still running into difficulty. So we ended up using dates in milliseconds. So we were able to do the milliseconds from epoch in order to calculate our dates. So we said, okay, let's pull our date from the database in milliseconds. We know that we can add then 4 full days of milliseconds, which has already been calculated for this previous function, add that in, and then it'll return us a date when we convert it back from milliseconds into a date string. So that's what we're doing here in this next purchase date. We are bringing it from milliseconds once we do all these calculations here in milliseconds. And then all of that gets stored to the database when the item is updated at that 24-hour mark. So we are marking checked time becomes the last purchase date. The check time field gets deleted. The actual purchase interval gets updated with that purchase interval that is between the last two purchases as calculated here. Number of purchases gets incremented by 1 every time that it's purchased, and estimated frequency is given this purchase estimate that's calculated by the estimates.js script. I think that's it. I hope. This one was really like algorithm heavy for us in trying to figure out how all these things interact. So hopefully I did it justice and covered all the topics, but if Yolanda has anything to add, or if there's questions, you know, cool, all that.
Well, unless Leonel has something to add, I have a question for you.
All right.
So you mentioned that, you know, you're not entirely confident in the math, and that's totally fair. I mean, these things are very easy to get wrong, especially to get them off by 1. So kind of my questions for you is, if you wanted to have more confidence in this algorithm or an algorithm in the future, what would you do to try to improve your level of confidence?
I think one of the things that for me would personally help is with our date structure. We're calculating things in number of days and in other places in milliseconds, and then kind of tying those in with a date string and hoping that it all works. So I think for me, what I'm looking at potentially this next week as something to implement is adding in an additional package in React that would allow us to do a little bit more seamless date modification. So I'm not worried about our calculations as much. I think that would help me feel more confident in that, because the estimates.js itself, after looking through it, I kind of understand what's happening a little bit more than I did initially. But yeah, a lot of it is the math that we've done, I feel pretty good about, but every once in a while it trips me up.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, having a consistent way to operate is definitely useful, and having a consistent way to interact with external dependencies as well as your front end is always a great thing. I'm guessing this is probably a little outside of the scope of TCL, but what are your thoughts on unit tests and how they would associate with something like this?
I mean, I think unit tests would be rad for something like this. I've never implemented them in React. I've only done RSpec and Ruby, but I think that that could be a really great thing just to ensure that the outcome that I expect is what's actually happening. And definitely something that I would like to look into in React, since I just don't have experience with it.
Cool. No, that's, yeah, I think that this is like prime for a nice little unit test or two to check and say, hey, this is exactly what I want. And of course, you know, probably not within the scope of TCL, but I always find it's interesting to keep a track of what would be a good thing to test and, you know, get a nice list.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's interesting. Like, I've thought about this a couple of different times. I've seen it kind of always come up at some point, just like we are, for the most part, ignoring the whole testing and the like, what should you put into your code and test? And is that part of your definition of done for your piece of work? And, you know, how much of that is appropriate? And, you know, we're kind of ignoring all of that. I think, yeah, your point is good. Like, if that was part of like your standard way of doing things, was to make sure that like you had put in like unit tests, this would be one like, oh, well, then how did an off by 1 error, you know, get past the unit testing type of thing, right? And then you can all be, you know, in a retro or something, say like, yep, we're going to add more unit tests to our you know, our stories. That's part of our definition of done now. We're going to make sure that we have this level of coverage. And yeah, it is pretty much out of scope, because it's a whole thing that we are on purpose kind of ignoring, but I think you're spot on. Like, I think that's the type of thing that's exactly where that would have come into play.
For sure. I think it's that thing that had all of us had experience with unit tests or from the jump been like, yeah, let's implement it. It would have been a lot easier. But from knowledge of working in other code bases, implementing unit tests after you've already written the code that potentially you didn't write is much more challenging because you don't actually know the expected outcome and how it should function. So you're learning both sides at the same time. But yeah.
Did you have very much success manual testing this and trying to grab the edge cases and kind of confirming that it works as you expect?
So we did. I actually need to call out Sam because he caught something that the rest of us all missed. I had at some point when I was driving input the wrong variable name. And the way that the estimates.js is set up, I'm going to pull this up for a second. We were actually triggering this if case where if last estimate is not a number. So we were passing in a variable that was null. And therefore, a stringless else case, we were getting updated dates and we were like, oh, we're not getting any errors. This is awesome. And then Sam caught it and was like, hey, I don't think this exists. And it was a really, really great catch because we were like, oh yeah, it's updating. Everything seems great. The math seems to be working. And we just like got lucky when we were doing it that it worked out. So yeah, I think thanks, Sam, for, I don't know how you caught that and we missed it, but very appreciative of that.
Awesome. Good job, Shem. I'm also going to put a shameless plug here for TypeScript, because I think this is exactly what TypeScript tries to catch, is those exact type errors.
I
Cool.
love TypeScript, but I'm an old school Java person. Like, that's how I was raised. And so I love my type systems. And then if you're like coming from a pure JavaScript or Python land, then you're like, you guys are crazy. I don't know.
Yeah, where I work, it's almost all Go and TypeScript. And one of my fellows is coming from pure Python JavaScript. And he's just like, oh my God, type safety, what is this thing? Yeah.
I actually have a quick question about it, and we don't need to dive into it too much, but and I haven't actually explored this of React too much, but isn't there like a params or a type style kind of aspect that you can implement into React that's not TypeScript as well?
Thinking like JavaDoc, I think is what it is you're looking for.
I don't know if it's that. I forgot exactly what the term is. I'll have to look into it, but I remember it's almost like a validations aspect of React, but it implements like the type of your variables. I think it's like 2 params, or I forgot exactly what the actual term was, but I'll look into it after. But I was just wondering if you guys might know a little bit about it, but I'll definitely look into it after this.
Well, my guess is that TypeScript is a lot newer than JavaScript. So, and this problem predates TypeScript. So I'm sure there's been other solutions that have come around to try to solve exactly these type problems.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, could be a very good one.
I'm sure the thing that you're thinking of exists. Like, it might not be TypeScript.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks for the demos, guys.
Yeah. I'm going to segue us into the next thing. By the way, I think you guys are all doing excellent. I think you've got an almost completely functional app now. We are getting to like the little last chunk of like function stories that are coming up. So like to the point of, reading ahead a little bit, I think you're already kind of starting to churn on, what you're going to do when it's feature complete, right? And then you can go in and start to play with it. And what might you want to do? So this is where you want to start chewing on those thoughts now, because we'll start talking about them more in detail next week. Also, I really like that you did timestamp in millis. I like the epoch time because I think it is the most accurate and less likely to mess you up. There are other people who will swear up and down that the whatever UTC or ISO string format is the one you want, and they're liars and they're wrong. They might think they have good reasons, but they don't. So, but anyway, it's one of those things. Yeah, it trips
date manipulation is it's wild. I was talking to my mentor at work. He's like, now that you've done it the like manual way, you might want to look at a package just to streamline everything. And I was like, that's actually a good call, but I was convinced that I was like, I'm going to make this work without it first.
Yeah.
So
The answer is almost always library, but oh no, I clicked the wrong button. So I grabbed slides, but I grabbed the wrong slides. So give me just a second to pull up the right slides real quick. But while I'm doing that, I was on an airplane last weekend. I was coming back from a funeral that I was at. And on the airplane, I was listening to a podcast, and the podcast was talking about the subject was a news article. Can't remember if it was like the Times or the Wall Street Journal or something like that. And they were doing a piece on a guy who had lived in California, and he had done over 180 lawsuits against kind of companies in the California area for violations against the American Disabilities Act. So in this case, the guy was in a wheelchair, and they kind of focused on one of the lawsuits in particular, where he went to a small, single owner restaurant and had made a reservation to get, an accessible table. And when he showed up, like, they did have a ramp, but the table was full and they weren't able to actually seat him. And they ended up putting him at the bar, but it wasn't really accessible then. And then, it was kind of he does this as a principle. So he goes around and he makes these lawsuits, not because he's trying to be a jerk, but because it's really the only way to get sort of that stuff enforced a lot of the time, right? There's not like there's police walking around and checking for, that your business is accessible. It's pretty much up to people who have accessibility issues to go in and sort of complain when things are not up to standard. And then those lawsuits sort of create compliance and enforcement across the issue. Like the point they were trying to make is that this dude is not making money off of being litigious. He's literally like, this is the only way he can go about his day and go eat at a restaurant or go, watch a movie and these types of things. There are obviously always going to be litigious people out there. But they were talking about this, and then the financial burden though that put on, this small business owner who had, restaurants are a razor thin margin business, right? Already. And, she basically didn't have the money to cover the lawsuit, and it almost took her out. It sounded like that particular restaurant was okay, but a lot of them don't, kind of survive that type of thing. And, can go under because they ended up getting sued and were in violations of the American Disabilities Act, which the law is out there. And this is the wrong slides again. The law is out there, and you can see, you can read, and you can look up the standards, and you can prepare so that you don't get caught, in those types of situations. But not only should you really be doing that to protect your, self from, a financial crisis, but it's also, pretty much the right thing to do, right? Like, we want people with, disabilities and that type of thing to be able to, go and enjoy the same stuff that able-bodied people are able to do. And that doesn't apply any differently to the web. It is one of those things where it's easy to forget. It's difficult to get right. It takes a lot of effort, and it's really hard to know when you're done, right? Like you can always kind of be a semi-accessible or, semi-unaccessible website and get away with it, for lack of a better term, most of the time, right? Or maybe even take some minor, slaps on the wrist here and there, but like you can pretty much keep going. So the point I'm trying to make is that the line between what you should do and you have to do is actually pretty gray in a lot of places. And you will see a lot of companies intentionally kind of ignore accessibility because they don't want to spend the money and they don't want to spend the time, and they can mostly be okay. But we don't want to be building websites that people can't go to, right? We don't want to build a product that some people can't use. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of thing that we need to watch out for. And we need to watch out for and build it into our workflows, because the longer you put it off and ignore it as a problem, the harder it is to do and to fix and to go back and take care of. And to kind of the point of unit testing a minute ago, and sort of the similar type of discussion, right? If you wanted to avoid your application from having simple one-off error or zero off by one errors, right? That pretty much anyone can make. It's a really, really simple thing. It's common, super happens all the time. And the reason that we have unit tests in there is to prevent things like that from making it into production, because we are all going to be capable of making those mistakes. In the same way, you might want to, when you get the opportunity to advocate for such a thing, make it a point to try and build it into your development flow and your development process, to try and say, hey, we need to worry about this stuff, if nothing else, because it might cost us money down the line. Certain businesses won't do work with us or will get sued, but also because it is ultimately the right thing to do, and you need to do it as part of your workflow in order to get it done, to get it to be done right. So I say that kind of grandstanding a little bit. Can everybody see the Chrome window now with the start of the slides up? But just to kind of make the case for it being important, it doesn't just apply to tech stuff. It applies kind of all over, but we're in a, this is the space that we're in, and we are also obligated to pay attention to it. When you see accessibility referred to, in the techno Twitter crowd or whatever, right? You might see it be, used under the hashtag ally or A11Y. A couple of other acronyms like that out there. Things like location is L10N, internationalization is I18N, accessibility A11Y stands for, kind of the letters that you shortened in the middle. Anyway, what we're talking about is web accessibility is the inclusive practice of ensuring that there are no barriers to prevent interaction with or access to websites on the World Wide Web by people with physical disabilities, situational disabilities, socioeconomic restrictions, and restrictions on bandwidth and speed. When sites are correctly designed, developed, and edited, generally all users have equal access to information and functionality. The W3C maintains a working group of those that are dedicated to web accessibility and publishes those related standards. In the US, Section 508 requires government agencies to make websites accessible to people with disabilities. In particular, that one means that if you are 508 compliant, the federal government is allowed to work with you, which actually covers a lot of stuff and a lot of potential business in America. Again, that's the American standard, but just important to know, if you're going to deal with people in the government as part of your customers, which a lot of people are, you have to be 508 compliant by law for them to work with you. Some people with disabilities access websites using assistive technologies. These include screen readers, screen magnifiers, speech input, assistive keyboards, and braille displays. Popular screen readers include NVDA and JAWS on Windows, and VoiceOver, which is built into Mac OS. So again, you can't see the screen. It is going to run through and literally read the content of the page to you, so that you can't work with it. Other cool devices, they actually do have braille kind of keyboards and dynamic things that will actually kind of raise the bumps so that people can feel content dynamically. Not implemented super wide, but that some of that stuff is really cool. There's other things too that are going on though, like maybe you aren't just completely blind, but maybe you've got color blindness, so contrast ratios are super important, and things like being able to magnify text, on your page in case, their eyesight's there, but it's not super focused, right? To be able to make super big text that's easy to read for people with poor eyesight. There's a lot of different things to think about and different ways that people can access websites that play into their accessibility. Again, here's on the why. I was kind of grandstanding a second ago, but it's the right thing to do to provide equitable access to information, right? There's very little on that you're putting out there into the world that, should not be seen by, a certain class of society, especially, people who are disabled, which is, not their fault. You may be, legally obligated to make your website accessible. As kind of was just talking about, more people in the US access websites with assistive technology than live in Canada at all, the whole country. So it's just worth pointing out, this is a substantial number of people. We're not talking about a small number that is insignificant in any way, even if it was that important, right? And then making your page more accessible for people with disabilities makes them more accessible for everyone. So again, we want to, the web is for everybody. So this persona spectrum came from, this one is published by Microsoft and sort of an inclusive design work that they put out. And it just kind of describes there are different stages of, accessibility needs that people might have. So for touch, you might have someone with a permanent disability, someone with one arm, temporary, right? Maybe you just broke your arm and you're unable to use it for a while. And, new parents who are, constantly holding a baby in one arm or something, right? Is the example here. Same thing for sight. So a permanently blind person, someone with a medical condition like cataracts, where they, have lost their ability to see, or even a distracted driver, right? Text to speech should be reading your text to you if you need them, while you're driving. Don't be fumbling while your phone. I see that so often. It drives me crazy. Get off your phone while you're behind the wheel of the car. Anyway, and then, hearing, deaf infections, or, someone who works in a noisy job, and, speaking, someone who's nonverbal, if they've got, a throat condition, or even if, they just don't speak English the same way that the computer thought they should, right? This has actually there's been a ton of studies on like the bias in algorithms and stuff. And like, if it's not what the thing was trained on, then it ends up messing up. Anyway, there's lots of stuff on that one. So the how. So again, this is what I was alluding to earlier about it actually being hard to get to like a place where you would consider yourself to be done with accessibility. Although I'd say a lot of the best practice stuff really just comes into play, like as you're writing the code, just remember to like put a little bit of extra brain capacity on including things like semantic HTML tags, alt attributes on your image tags, ARIA labels, I got a link here to what the phrase is, the accessible rich internet applications. I always forget that acronym. But just there are additional attributes that help with things like screen readers and stuff for understanding the content of a tag. Ensure all the content is reachable by keyboard, and that tab ordering makes sense. So, if you think about it, moving a mouse physically is a much more, like intense effort for a movement than it is to just type your fingers on a keyboard, or use a verbal keyboard, or all kinds of that other stuff. Color contrast, as I've mentioned, people with red green blindness, or other conditions where they have a hard time telling different things across the screen. And don't use only color to signify state. So don't let green and red tell you if your user can proceed or not. Change some text or some other thing, right, to make it obvious to that type of stuff. So again, those are things that you can just, if you start doing that as a practice, and even better if you can start to get your team to do it as a practice, so that you're all kind of checking in on each other. This stuff is actually not that hard to do, like as you write the code and make it go. But again, it's really hard to go back and then start looking for all the places that you missed and add it in later. Identify accessibility issues for remediation. So there are some automated tools. Axe is a good one. It's just a piece of tool automation. There are quite a few Chrome extensions at this point that all kind of handle accessibility in different ways. I've got one turned on at the moment, but there's a bunch. And none of them are wrong. Some of them might have, a lot more content, some of them a lot less. Some of them are super, let you tweak and dial all the knobs, and some just are simple, but find what works for you. It's hard to go wrong. And audit accessibility by tester companies. So you can have outside consultants come in and look at your code and say like, hey, I poked at it and here's my report, and go fix all these things and you'll be better. Also worth noting that even on, the way that these, websites are handled, you get kind of graded. There's, I think, the ADA has a grading scale of like A, AA, AAA in terms of, how accessible a website is. So you kind of want to hit at least, AA as a bar. So demo time, we're going to go pick on a couple of different people. It's shockingly easy to find website violations. So I will actually say I pulled in the extension that I have here. Accessibility insights for web is just this one that Andrew was using in his demo for the slides. And it's got some nice options. It's powered by Axe, as we were kind of saying before, and it's got some ad hoc tools, a full in-depth assessment. You can just click on this fast pass button and get a relatively quick spirited report. Picking on Domino's here because they were in trouble not that long ago. They actually did get sued and lost and tried to fight it in court. about their website, being inaccessible. I'm going to drag this tab back over so you can see the right thing. So I just ran the report on it. Still got violations according to the FastPass on this thing. So in this case, it says, hey, you're missing an ARIA attribute. Hey, your element has, bad color contrast. Hey, you're again, more contrast and colors, a bunch of contrast and colors in here, but pretty easy to automatically go on here and spit out and say like, hey, Domino's, you still got work to do. But not just Domino's. I can go to google.com and I can run this report again and get a FastPass report in here and say like, hey, oh, let's see, more contrast issues. Looks like even Google's not terrible. ARIA required, missing an ARIA on the input and stuff. So all in all, if you're Google and your website, it's nice, it gives you, points out little hotspot areas for you kind of all over that are causing problems. But you kind of expect the most used website in the world to not have accessibility issues, like to try and be the gold standard. It's not. So it's just one of those things where you can go around and find examples of it anywhere, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be trying, right? Any effort is better than no effort. And unfortunately, I've noticed it to be an uphill battle almost everywhere that I've seen software developers. So it's an important one. So that being said, I think that's all. There's more links here in the slides that we've got kind of to, and I'll share these out with everybody here in a minute. So you can go kind of click into this area. There's so much other content out there. There's so many other thoughts out there. If you're, going to go rabbit hole on stuff, you could spend a long time doing it for accessibility, and you're probably only hitting the tip of the iceberg with it, but it is something that you want to be thinking about kind of all the time. So questions and or thoughts about the accessibility topic? I know for sure, Graham, you've probably got opinions on this. Like you have to, everybody does in this area once you've been developing for any period of time. But especially, I don't know, did you in our Collabs in your learning process, has this been made? Have you seen people make an emphasis of talking about this? Have you seen people avoid talking about this? I mean, have you spent much time with it at all? Kind of tell me where are you guys at here with this stuff?
My only experience with it is like at work, we have learning modules every year about accessibility, but it's never been approached from a perspective of like me as a developer, because this is like global learning that the entire company does, regardless of position. So it's pretty vague. Like it goes over what is legally required, but it doesn't talk about the specifics of like how you attain that. It just talks about like, hey, here are things you need to look for. Like, you don't use color change to signify something if you're not also going to have another signifier that tells them what's going on. So that's my experience. It's never been with the code.
Is anyone holding anyone accountable to any of those standards? Like, is there a report or
I don't know.
Audit? Yeah, no, that's doesn't surprise me.
Yeah,
Right?
like I don't know from the product team side like what actually happens, because I'm doing like merchant supporting stuff. So if we get accessibility issues sent to us, we direct them to the product teams, but we don't know what happens.
Interesting.
Yeah, I personally haven't had too much experience with the accessibility aspect of programming. I think only like, the early tutorials in HTML have really kind of implemented them on like Free Code Camp and stuff like that, but didn't really dive into it too much. I think, being in this program right now, it's the first time that anyone's actually focused on accessibility in my learning journey. I'm curious for you, Lyle and Graham, like in the companies that you've worked with, like how much focus they have on accessibility as a junior developer or mid-level or senior. If you guys want to kind of divulge into that, maybe after everyone kind of takes their turn explaining their experience, but I'm curious about that.
I'll let Graham start. I've seen it across the spectrum probably is my answer to that one. But yeah, I don't know, Graham. What do you got?
So first off, disclosure, which is that the vast majority of my work is mostly on a server, and you don't really need a server to be accessible. However, the accessibility work that I do is when some of our stuff needs to be presented to the user. Now, most of the time, I'm not the one designing the components from the very beginning. But one thing that I have seen is that there's been a really strong push within our company to rebuild a lot of our components that may not have been perfectly accessible into ones that are. So I have this component library in front of me. So as a developer, I want to, I don't know, I need to add this new element to this new page and change this thing so that our feature can be properly presented. The idea is that at the end of the day, I shouldn't need to care that much because accessibility is not an afterthought. It's something that's been baked in at the ground level so that whatever I use, it's already accessible. And that's kind of the direction we're trying to go. And that's the one thing that I think really bugs me about a lot of, especially startups, and that accessibility to them is an afterthought. It's not their main customer base. It's not needed to get to their MVP. It's not needed for this, whatever. And it's just there for something, we'll do later. And so a lot of companies forget it, and that just bugs me to no end. Yeah, that was my experience.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I've worked in healthcare where the websites need to be 508 compliant. Same with we were doing server stuff and selling this product to FedGov. And so all of the thing needed to be 508 compliant. And a lot of that emphasis was built on just, getting to the point where like people would sign their contracts with you so that they would, so you hit your audit and you get your certification or whatever, and that'd be good enough. There was once where we were building a internal component library, thing like Graham was saying, and that was where we were trying to do the thing that he said, where like, we don't want anyone else to come back later and have to worry about this. So we're going to try and do it right here because we know it's going to be something that people are going to care about later. So that was the one where we cared about it the most. Anyone actually product facing, again, was mostly on the 508 compliance thing. I will say, if your product on the backend side is an API, so you expect other companies to be able to talk to you through a REST API or otherwise, then you actually are supposed to be accessible there too. And that means having things like, it's less important. So like, as long as your APIs are maybe machine discoverable, it's probably good enough. But internationalization comes into more in play there. So like, your error codes change languages, and that kind of thing. But there's also elements where like if your text becomes used in another front end application, right, you need to be supplying information not only into what does this piece of text mean with the context information so that you can be displaying it, in the proper area. So again, it's less of a concern for people who don't touch the front end code, but it happens. But yeah, I mean, did anyone have like an interesting experience where so far you've actually been made to care about it yet? Interesting. I was hoping
Only in this project.
it's gonna come around more.
And I
later.
think we already learned that it's a lot easier to implement from the beginning than go back later and fix things.
Definitely agree on that.
Oh shoot, we're running late on time. Well, we'll move on to this, to the next thing. So apologies on taking longer on that, but accessibility is important. Keep thinking about it. Okay, so we've got our cards up in here. I have pulled up these things just so we're aware. Looks like we're at Tatiana and Danny and Sam and Yolanda coming up for our next week's assignments. And let's look at what they are. So on this one, as a user, I want to be able to delete items from my shopping list so that my list isn't cluttered with items I don't want to buy in the future. Pretty straightforward delete stuff ask. So it's possible that our users may make an error when entering an item or may decide that they won't be buying a certain item again in the future. Let's help them keep their list tidy. Basically, delete. A user is able to delete an item from the shopping list before deleting. Prompt the user that they really want to delete your nice "Are you sure?" button, right? And deletion should cause the associated records in the database to be deleted. We've got the wireframe up over in here. It should, there's a link. It should pop up the dialog because this is destructive. And many teams use a modal. Modals have accessibility concerns. So, just a simple confirm dialog is probably, again, you'll see a lot of examples on the web that actually spit up a modal component. It's hard to get a piece of new JavaScript that you've injected into the system to behave like a pop-up alert that would actually say like, hey, alert, you got a notification here. I think, though, we did it right with the ones that we have already. So because we do pop up the little thingy, and I think that's good enough. We should double check though for accessibility concerns, but that might be the right pattern. So I think we're a little bit ahead of this one. But still, the thing you want to know with deleting stuff also is that in a lot of situations, you build a system that assumes your data is there. And then when your data stops being there, right, you might have null pointer errors and some other stuff. So it's a good opportunity to really kind of double check yourself, poke the application in a lot of spots, and make sure that things don't explode when you start deleting and removing things from lists and from the database and that kind of stuff. Over here on this one, as was mentioned earlier, we are also going to implement some sort. So as a user, I want to view a list of my shopping list items in order of how soon I am likely to need to buy each of them again, so that it's clear what I need to buy soon. Okay. Sorting. We're going to add sorting to the list. So the possible item states are as follows: need to buy soon, need to buy kind of soon, need to buy not soon, and then inactive. It doesn't have a need to buy on it. Items are the AC items in the list are shown as visually distinct, maybe a different background color. Although remember what we just said about accessibility and colors. According to how soon the item is expected to be bought again: soon, kind of soon, not soon, and inactive. Items should be sorted by the estimated number of days until next purchase. So I think intuitively, ones that need to be purchased sooner should probably float to the top. Items with the same number of estimated days until the next purchase should be sorted alphabetically. So things within that subgroup should then be ordered alphabetically, as kind of mentioned earlier. And then items in the different states should be described distinctly when read by a screen reader. So that gotcha that I mentioned before. The criteria for an item being inactive has tripped up teams in the past. So again, this is, I don't need to buy this or whatever, right? It's been reworded to be more clear, but the gist is that an item is inactive if the time that has elapsed since the last purchase is twice or more what was estimated the last time it was purchased. So it's not on you're probably not buying this thing, right? It's a lingering item on your list. So it's not going to be part of your items of concern here based on the level of frequency. If we have more questions about that, we might want to start a thread in Slack as to what that piece means, because there's sort of an implied piece of math for this inactive state. If last estimate was 14 days and 28 days have elapsed, so I've ignored this thing for twice as long as it was supposed to have been purchased, then the item is considered inactive. Teams in the past have also over-engineered the solution here by breaking the list out into separate groups, but it should be achievable in a single list where visual treatment is based on what category the item falls into. So you probably just need a sorting function that takes into account. If you're building out more complicated data structures and brackets and areas of the app, you're probably overthinking it. And then be sure not to use only use the color to denote how soon the user. Again, this is the accessibility thing. Good luck. I don't know why I would say good luck on this one, just like ominous. It's not that bad. The inactive thing is just, it's a weird thing to think about for a second, and then you get it and you go, okay, and we're cool. Does anyone have a preference that immediately jumps to mind in something that they would like to tackle for the next couple of weeks or next week? Sorry. Okay. So let's do the delete story. Tatiana and or Danny. Delete or sort? That's easy. Delete or sort, any thoughts on that one at all?
I'm fine with either.
I feel like I picked last week, didn't I?
Fine.
I don't know.
Sam or Yolanda, how about that one? Since they passed. Sorting? Deleting?
Sure.
Deleting's fun. You get a nice, purge things out of the database. That very Marie Kondoing things out of, that was a verb a couple of years ago, right? I don't know, either one.
Yolanda, I'm down with either.
Is it okay if we try out sort? I really want to get a better understanding on like dates.
Yeah.
Because I'm just not there yet. And last story, I just kept confusing myself. And I felt if I do more practice with this, get that pattern down, if that's okay with you, and if you could guide me, I would really appreciate it.
I am definitely down for the challenge. Let's go.
Yolanda, Danny,
thank
and
you.
Tatiana, that puts you on delete. That's all right. Cool. All right. So I will also do the doodly thing. Shoot, we have some scheduling stuff I meant for us to talk about here. If you're all okay for let's chat about that briefly before we wrap up the meeting. So I'm going to schedule an office hours this week. I'll just do the doodle thing, be kind of what we've done in the past. How are we still feeling like Saturday is an okay time to have this? I know we're seeing some people are maybe having an issue making it on Saturday. Would it help to move to Sunday at some time? Let's talk kind of what works best for everybody.
Yeah, I was oh, Tatiana, you first, please.
No, it's the same. It's the same for you and me. Well, I think Sam is unavailable next Saturday, and then I'm unfortunately unavailable the last 2 Saturdays. But I can do the Sundays.
Okay.
But also
Likewise.
happy, if that doesn't work for the team, I can record a walkthrough and share a link.
Likewise.
Cool. Is Sundays a problem for anyone to do?
What time on Sunday?
Is an excellent question. So we are at 1 o'clock now. My first knee-jerk reaction to that question would be, what if we did 1 o'clock on Sunday? 1 o'clock Pacific, so that is 4 o'clock Eastern, and everyone in between, right? So that could work. Does that still work? Or we could go earlier, we could go later if anyone doesn't want that.
Yeah, my Sundays are free for the next foreseeable future. So I'm flexible with anything that you guys are down for.
Yeah, I think I can do Sundays at 1 Pacific time. It's so far so good. I'm looking at my calendar. I don't see anything, but if anything pops up, I'll let you guys know.
Yep, Slack is there, and we can take care of it. Whatever we need to in the meantime. Okay, so for next week for sure, and probably going for the remaining weeks, I'm just gonna bump it same time, but the next day over from Saturday into Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. or 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. I knew I was gonna do it because we were talking about time earlier, and now I'm messing up time again. Oh well, whatever. Okay, everybody cool with that? Great. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Again, everything's looking awesome. Y'all are thinking about the right stuff. You're trying to think ahead. You're trying to anticipate problems and build it in the application. And you're talking to each other about it, which is amazing and great. And you wouldn't be surprised how often team communication just is a problem. So you're doing fantastic. Keep up doing all the stuff. Again, these issues this week are they're going to get you to again what is pretty close to feature complete, and then there will be kind of 2 weeks after that where we will be talking about what else we want to do in there. The story itself, number 13, is kind of, I want it to look and feel great, but it's very open-ended and on purpose, right? Because it's going to be, okay, what does that mean to you, and how do you want to go out there and do it, right? There might be additional things you thought about functionality wise, or you might just want to go in and style it crazy, whatever, right? There's going to be time to go and tackle it. Any last thoughts, questions, comments, concerns before we wrap it up?
who should we assign as the reviewer this week for the
good,
PR request?
good question. I think that was April for next week, but I don't.
I think it's me, actually.
Is it? Okay. It was not
Let me just double check.
It's fine. No, you're right. You're right. I'm pretty sure you are. Because we were talking about it earlier. I remember. It's gonna be Graham. Unless I
Thank
tell you
you.
otherwise later. Okay.
Yeah, that's me.
Sweet. Fantastic. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. Stay cool. Don't get caught in any heat waves or fires or anything. And we'll see you in a bit.
Thanks,
Bye,
Lyle.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Graham. Bye, everyone.